Is being live streamed? Yes. All right, and it's going to start echoing for a second. Then I'll just turn that part off. All right, great. So that's happening in the background. Okay. We can get going. All righty.
All right.
So really, really nice to have you here. Thank you so much for taking time out. All right, very exciting talk today. I'm going to do a quick intro for myself, and then of course I'll pass it off to my wonderful guest here. So I'm Dr. Michelle Wilshire, licensed clinical psychologist and founder of Wasabi and Well. I practice both in New York and in Florida, and I am sitting here today with one of my longtime professional crushes. And following her since 2016.
Wow.
And I love what she does. I love what she's into. So without further ado, how about you introduce yourself?
Well, thank you for having me. Wow, professional crush. That's so cool. So I'm Dr. Sarah. I am a licensed psychologist. So my background is in counseling psychology. So I have a doctorate in counseling psychology. And I spent much of the years in the area of child abuse and trauma, doing psychological evaluations, some therapy. And that's really significant work, but I also have a creative streak. So I really was longing to do something a little bit more creative. That's when I found design psychology. I was like searching, looking for something. And when I found it, I was so excited. And so design psychology is where you apply psychological principles to design. So it's basically helping you create spaces that support you emotionally, that contribute to your well-being. And so I spent a year long doing like a mentorship in that area. And now I actually offer consultation services doing what we call design psychology programming for clients who want just that little bit more out of their space.
Love it. Beautiful. All right. Yeah. Really great intro, and definitely going to be diving more into all of that. So actually, can we maybe spend a little bit more time on your origin story? Just a little bit longer, because like you said, you are naturally inclined towards design, and then of course helping people and supporting. So we have all of that, but like, I mean, I think a lot of people have not heard about design psychology the way that you do it, the like design therapy, for example. So how the heck did you discover this whole idea, this concept?
Okay, so like I love interior design. I mean, I love looking through images. I love creating. I love being able to use the space to tell a story. And so I always had that. But I never thought of doing it as a career, because I was also interested in psychology. I was really interested in helping adolescents be able to manage that often really difficult time. You know, I had a challenging adolescence, so I wanted to be able to help other young girls go through it, other people go through it. And so that was the path that I sort of set for myself, was I was going to do this psychology process, so the traditional process. So like, getting a degree in counseling psychology, doing internships in that area in counseling. But like I said, it wasn't all of what I wanted to do, but I didn't realize that until I was in my career. And I said, there's something else that I want to do there. I need to be more creative. And so just kind of like, looking at books, looking, online, just trying to find somebody who's interested in what I'm interested in. And then I found this environmental psychologist named Toby Israel. And I hit her up, and she, told me all about what she did. And I was really excited because she's, design psychology is really a branch of environmental psychology that's looking at how spaces, how spaces impact us. And so she started this whole applied area. So environmental psychology is very research oriented. So if you know an environmental psychologist, most likely they are working in the area of academia doing research. So design psychology is sort of the applied version of that, actually working with clients, using that research, putting it into practice and saying, okay, this is your space. You want to, want a space that you connect with emotionally, not just, pretty spaces. I mean, we all want pretty spaces, but sometimes when we have the pretty space, we don't always feel like we're connected to it. There's something that's missing. And that usually comes along with more clarity on what it is that you really need in your space. And that's what design psychology is all about, helping us have clarity on what it is that we really need in a space to help us feel better and to help us grow and help us be the person that we want to be. So that's kind of how I found design psychology, which just happenstance. No one said, there's this area of psychology called design psychology. I just had to search for it.
Right.
So I was really excited to find it.
You've really put in the work. I mean, that's what I'm hearing. Yeah. It's not like you just show up at, your program or your school and just do it and then someone ushers you in. No, you had to seek it out. I think that's such an important point. I remember someone told me a long time ago, you make your career. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that a lot more these days, and people have a better understanding of that. But that's just something, such a great life lesson right there that demonstrates that you had to read, research, ask questions, seek help. I mean, all the different things, and then follow through. That's pretty big.
Yeah, I know. And I think that, sometimes when we're going through the educational system, we're kind of just kind of following along. At least, much of the people in my generation, that's what we did. We were told, this is what you do after school. You go to college and then you get a career. And so it wasn't easy to go through the process in terms of it was hard work, but there was a path that was laid out. So I knew what I had to do. I knew that I had to take this number of classes. I knew that I had to do this internship. And then when I was done, I would set up a practice or, work in the area of psychology in a hospital setting. But that really wasn't enough for me. When I was going through it, I realized that, there's this other area that I'm really interested in. So now I have to create my own because I don't really know anybody besides one or two people that are doing this design psychology thing. So I'm going to have to create this. And this is what it means to create a career. So going to school is one thing, but then you have to actually create a career as well. So that's kind of a big lesson. That was a big lesson for me.
Yeah, that's key. Yeah, really love it. So I'm curious, through everything that you've been through and, fighting for your career and to feel connected, what has surprised you the most about your career and in this industry? So either one, but what has surprised you the most?
What has surprised me the most? I think the thing that really resonates with me is that you have to find out what you really want. And that, that's people say that a lot, but I mean, you really have to, in the sense that you really need to know who you are and what you want. You really have to have some self-awareness. Like I said before, I had one part of me that really wanted to do the psychology thing, but then there's that other part, that creative part that I didn't know what to do with. But looking back now, I would have had to have done something with that because I would have been pretty miserable if I just, went on one path and ignored the other. So we're made up of, we have different interests. There's different parts of ourselves. We're not just one thing. We could be many different things. We could have many different interests. And so you have to really be attuned to that and be able to create an outlet for all those different areas, or one will suffer and you really won't be as happy as you could be if you ignore one for the other. That's what I learned. Ooh. That's one big surprising thing.
That's real. Yep. Hold on. There we go.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. You have to be able to feed all these parts. I love that. I love what you said about that. And that actually makes me think of I took the strong inventory as part of my internship, and my supervisor had to pull me aside and say, "You don't have the typical psychology profile. Like, you're not going to be happy if all you do is therapy. That's it. Just every
Yes.
day therapy. You're not going to." And I was like, "You're right. I probably could have told you that, but I maybe it was like hiding behind, everyone else that was in the room." But he validated that for me, and I was so, I mean, it's definitely the biggest gift, because just like you said, he kind of like he gave me permission to pursue other things,
Yes.
like coding and design,
Right.
and gardening, and like, I mean, I don't just
Yes.
have to do therapy. So to that point, like, I love that you discovered that for yourself and you made it happen. That's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. So we've got an idea of who you are, how you got to design psychology, part of your inspiration. Now, I think people are going to have a lot of questions still about, well, what do you do? How does it work? But maybe we could first talk about how, in what ways, what are some of the purposes that people come to you for help, right? What are some of the different reasons? If you can like share very like high level examples, like do they come to you for depression and anxiety to do design psychology, or is there other specific challenges that they are looking at?
Right. So there's a lot of people ask me, like, what's the difference between an interior designer and a design psychologist? And so, when people are getting ready to fix up their room, sometimes they hire an interior designer, or they do it themselves. They usually have a sense of what they want, because they've seen it, in images and magazines. There's a whole load of images that we can see and we can duplicate. But even with that, sometimes they still lack clarity. And sometimes they lack clarity because there's an emotional issue that's being reflected in the way that they're approaching their space. So, for example, like, somebody might say, "Oh, my friends have like this, bohemian eclectic space, and I really love that. And I want to be able to duplicate that in my space." And so they know that they want that, but they don't know how to do it. And they even might have some of the furnishings to do it, but they won't do it. And there's usually something that is stopping them, that's an emotional issue. So it's not just a matter of, I don't know which paint color to choose, like the green or the red. It's deeper than that. So I've had some clients that really have a hard time starting. And sometimes they feel stuck. And so through that work, I find that, there's issues that are emotional that are impacting how they're approaching life. And one of the ways is how they're approaching designing their space. So, for example, sometimes what I see is, we all want a nice looking space. We all want our space to look good. But sometimes people have issues with self-esteem and self-worth. And so they're scared to move and do anything because they feel like their home validates them. It doesn't reflect them, it validates them, which is a big difference. Because if your home reflects who you are, you're freer. You're freer to make choices. You're freer to say, I want this piece of furniture or that, because it's coming out of you. But if you use your space to validate you, it's more of an anxious approach to designing a space, because you're like, oh, if I make the wrong move, that means that something's wrong with me. So often,
wow.
Yeah. So, so a lot of times there's just these emotional issues that are and it shows up in other areas. It shows up in relationships, it shows up at work, but it also shows up in how they design their space. So they'll come to me because they don't know how to start. And it's not a simple, like I said before, like, I just don't know what, chair to pick. It's deeper than that. They know what chair they like, but they're having a hard time actually starting. And it's usually something emotional that's preventing them.
My mind is blown, because I didn't even think about that. And as you're talking about it, I'm like, oh, I'm forming my own, my own words around it, like thinking about, okay, this is a modality, right? It's the same way, like I might come to someone and say, okay, let's do some narrative therapy, right? For example.
Yeah.
But in this case, you're looking at to address their anxiety. But in this case, you're looking at, well, their choices or lack thereof, their inability to move through their space. I mean, that's so fascinating.
Yeah. And, there's different reasons why people are stuck. Some, and that's not just one reason. Sometimes it's complex. So it could be like a self-esteem issue. It could be a regret issue. Like maybe they didn't make the decision they thought they wanted to make, and they don't really like where they are right now. They don't really like their space. They don't like that they're living where they're living. And so they feel stuck. Even though they want to move forward, they feel stuck. And that's more reflective of the regret that they had. So all kinds of things can impact how you design your space. All kinds of emotional issues can impact it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's maybe jump from there. So you're sitting with someone who's filled with regret, right? And it's regret in their home. It's regret maybe in their career. Maybe the regrets all over the place, right? Spewing all out. But you're specifically honing in on their space. That's what they came for you for.
Right.
What happens next?
Okay.
What happens to this? Maybe it's me. I'm filled with regret, which actually is not too far off about like, I should have moved that there. And what would you do next with me?
So if it's showing up in your space, this sense of regret, first, I want to know a little bit about that. Like, where's this regret coming from? Is it because you felt like you didn't make the right decision at some point? Because, what happens is sometimes we get stuck in a place like that. And we think we have this sort of imagination that we think that it would have turned out differently if we did something else. But truth is, you don't really know if it's going to turn out differently. So you really can't be focused on the past. You have to move to the future. You focus on the present and move to the future. So if your space is more reflective of regret and you can't move and things are, sometimes people are still in boxes. They can't, they can't make a move. They can't make a decision. I have to work with them around, okay, let's do some exercises. What's your past experience with place? What's your present sense of place? Or, what's your future? What would you like your place to be? And so I work with them around that to kind of create what we call an ideal vision statement, like what you would want. I would want my home to feel, homely and warm, or whatever it is they come up with. And then it should also reflect goals. So like, people come to me with like career goals, educational goals, relational goals. I need to find all of that out because that tells me where you want to go. So I understand that you were upset about what happened in the past, but where do you want to go? And so a lot of that work, some of that work would be done in traditional therapy, addressing regret. But my work is supportive to that whole process. So this is the person you said you want to be. You said you want to have this business. You said you want to graduate from school. How does your space reflect that? Like, okay, so you want to start a business. And you have to start it from your home, maybe. Do you have a little area in your home that they've set up, like a desk, files? Do you have that? Because then that is what I would help them do. Create spaces that reflect where they want to be.
Create spaces that reflect where they want to be. Ooh, right there. That's a great quote. I love that. So would you say that the work you do with clients is highly structured?
There is a structure to it, but it's pretty fluid. So like when I do this exercises, obviously everybody's results will be different. Everybody's vision statement will be different. So it's very unique to the individual. So what I'm doing with them is I'm helping them create clarity with what they want. So they might, think that they want something. Maybe they design their whole room and it looks good in theory. Like it's right. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with the room, but maybe they just don't feel like something is off, but they can't quite put it into words. It doesn't feel like them. So the work that I do with them, those exercises will help identify what elements, what furnishings could kind of feel some of that to make it feel more unique and more individual. So like some of the exercises is like, one of them is called an environmental family tree, where I asked them all about their parents and their grandparents' spaces, what those spaces look like, how it was described. And of course, they may not necessarily have been to those places, but we don't always recognize the things that get passed down to us about space. So I asked them to describe what they've heard about their parents or their grandparents' space. Like for me, like my parents are from Jamaica. So I'm hearing all kinds of things about what it was like in Jamaica. Like my mom grew up in a very, like, my mom's in her 80s, so hope she doesn't mind me saying that. But she grew up in a very, like, dogmatic, like, religious environment. There was like one church, and so everybody in the town went to that one church, and like there was a lot of things that you couldn't do. So like you couldn't basically do anything, actually. Everything was considered like a sin. You couldn't do anything, right? So,
Wow.
and that also included stuff around the home. So like you couldn't have furnishings that were too nice. And we can go, that's like a whole nother thing. That's like a whole nother socio-cultural thing. But like she couldn't have furnishings that were too nice because I guess, I don't know, somehow that was sinful. I don't know. So, but I remember her saying to me, so I'm having this image in my mind. Okay, so you live in this town, you have furnishings, and they couldn't be too nice. But I remember her saying to me, but my grandmother would just buy what she wanted anyway. Like she would just buy what she wanted anyway. And so that whole idea, like there was a seed, but at the time I'm not really thinking, but there's a sense of independence, a little bit rebellion there, even within that sort of very rigid environment. And so those are the messages that got sent to me. So like my mom's house was very colorful. She wasn't necessarily into design, but I think, it was just a lot of color, a lot of life. The idea was for it to be homey, for a family. Do however you want to do. It's your house type of thing. And so that was a message that was sent to me. And so I'm sure, and I actually have done some of this work, that has transferred to the way that I design. So that's just one little example of how past experiences can like impact how you approach your home and your space. So those are some of the exercises that I do with the clients. And then there's this whole thing on like your present sense of place. Like where are some of the places you've been to that really had an impact on you? So I would discuss that with the client. Also, there's one called like a special objects inventory. What's something special that you have or had, and why? Do you have that reflected in your space now? So it's looking at all of the experiences that they've had, the environment, and creating an environmental autobiography. That's what they call it, environmental autobiography, to kind of create a space that is unique and feels like it's them. I think one of the highest compliments that somebody can have when they walk into your space is, wow, this looks like you. I just think that's one of the highest compliments. Yeah. Granted that you're a good person. But yeah, I just think because that's you, that's a reflection of you, So.
And I mean, thank you so much for sharing, disclosing and sharing part of yourself as well. That's so interesting to know that so you're saying, so your grandmother sort of started this fire, right? Of that led to your mom also being herself a bit more open and free, and then for yourself, an opportunity to discover that for you. So it sounds like it's just something that's spread, thankfully, in a beautiful way, a sense of freedom. Freedom and joy. Wow. I see how those conversations with a client itself would bring up a sense of joy, like just in that, right? Like, wow, there's this element of joy that you're even talking about in your sessions with them.
Yeah. And joy is really important, when you want your space to give you that at the very least. And so it's really important just to know what elements in a space would give you that. And so that's very individual, and that's based upon past, present, future sense of place. It's also based upon your personality type. There's a lot of different things to consider.
Yeah. No, that's such a good point. Like I know there's this huge big rush and trend with Marie or Marie Kondo, and things that bring you joy and this whole concept. But to that point, I don't know how much conversation people were having about that point. That like maybe this stand brings me joy, and really diving into, well, what is it? What's the story behind it? I didn't really hear a whole lot about that. And I'm curious for you in your work, what's like the most interesting item that you can recall that brought someone joy? Not interesting in a good or bad way, just like, someone might say the stuffed animal. That seems like pretty typical. Like, my mom gave me the stuffed animal when I was little. Okay, people keep at least one or two stuffed animals, right? Like something that like you had never really seen before as an item that brought someone joy.
Well, I don't think that it's necessarily one specific item that seems very interesting to you or I, but it's interesting to them. So like somebody might say, oh, this blanket, and it's a nice blanket, but it was given to them by someone they loved. Or like it could be like artwork, like sort of unique artwork, like zines or something like that maybe to me it doesn't seem like oh, I want that, but to them it means something. So what I always do is I say, if there's something that's that meaningful, find a way to put it up so that you can see it. You want to be able to have what we call identity anchors. Researchers have found that that's really important even for trauma, like to have identity anchors in your space so that you can say, this is the reflection of me. I mean, and it really does matter. And they could be reflections of you or the people that live in your house. There's research done around intergenerational identity anchors, meaning that it's not just you that's reflected, but it's also your kids. It's the people that you live with, the people that you're raising. Everybody should kind of feel like they belong. I know for a long time there was this idea that spaces should look like adult spaces and they should look a certain way. But now we're seeing a lot of like childlike furnishings being sort of mixed in with adult spaces because it's the idea that everybody belongs.
Yeah. I love that trend because so we were doing some like light work on our house recently, and I had to sit in my daughter's on her chair and desk and use it as my desk for several weeks.
That's so funny.
And it was rough. It was rough on my legs and things like that. But I was thankful in a way. I was like thankful that the chair is designed to hold adult weight. So it's also like functional items that are in your home that are actually for your kids, and being able to embrace that.
And it's like it's about self-awareness too, being able to know what it is that that you need. And that's kind of what this work is, really creating self-awareness.
So with that, like you said, you want to represent everyone in the home. What about people who have roommates? Like, I'm thinking they live in a big city, it's super expensive, and it's not like a college roommate. It's just got to have a roommate.
Right.
How can they create a space somewhere to feel good?
Well, when I work with clients that have roommates, I have them consider them too. So it's with some of the exercises, there's this one exercise called the environmental sociogram, and it's looking at the district, like how space is distributed. So like you have your individual spaces, you have your public spaces, you have your shared spaces. And so we want to make sure that those spaces are distributed comfortably for everyone. So obviously, if you have the individual space, then that's for that person. But then you have public and shared spaces. So in the shared spaces, what does that look like? what is your, what does your roommate, what does he or she want? What do they, what do they have an opinion? Sometimes, it's very different. Sometimes they don't have as much an opinion depending on how it's set up. So I definitely have them consider everyone in the house.
Okay, so there's a few questions popping up, but what I'm curious about is, I'm going to put the two questions out there because I know I'm going to forget. One, power and control. And so you just mentioned that as far as kind of like some people not having an opinion, but I wonder about power and control. And then secondly, organization and cleanliness. So whether it's roommates or family, and especially family, people have different thresholds, right, for putting things away. And I wonder, do you do any work around that with family or roommates? And then the second one is like, what does power? I imagine power control comes up. Like, for example, roommates. I've seen situations where one person takes most of the control. They own most of the furniture. They set most of the house rules. It's like really off balance, and the other person's just like, well, I'm just happy to have a place. So I'm wondering how these elements play into your work with clients.
Yes. So what we have to consider is, the whole power and control thing. Is the dynamic comfortable for everyone? Because sometimes, you have roommates that are just there and one person owns the spot and they don't really have much say, but it's really nice to include them anyway. So what I would do with the client is I would kind of help them think about, does their space meet their needs? And if so, what needs does it meet? So does it meet your aesthetic needs? Does it meet your need for safety? Does it meet your need for, does it meet your psychological needs for love and belonging? Does it meet your social needs? I'm trying to think of all the needs, all the needs. What does it meet all your needs? And then from there, I can figure out like who's happy and who's not. Because sometimes the roommates will come into the conversation. But so if there's an issue, then we just figure out how to work that out design-wise. But sometimes it's an issue of, okay, you need to address the deeper issue. How can this then be reflected in the space? So if there's an issue of control or power, that actually does need to be talked out directly. And then how can that be reflected in the space? Maybe when you do a gallery wall, it's not just your pictures that are up there, but all of their pictures as well. Or some of their pictures as well. So it's a mix. So it's about how to like put it all together so that everyone kind of feels like it's their space.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And then as far as like, because I can see how, when you walk into, like, I like, especially before kids and all the things, I used to live alone and I had this space, and I could make it magazine-like, and I knew I was, and so, but the struggle now is I can't have, once I can't, but it's been hard. It's harder to have that. And so I don't know, is my space giving me validation? I'm not sure. Or is it a reflection? I'm not quite sure yet. But I know it impacts my mood, right? And when I walk in and there's toys and something's not where it's supposed to be, and there's this and there's that, and it's just like, how can I work in this?
Right.
And so, I mean, what can you say to all the other people out there, whoever they are, not just moms, but people who are kind of like me, right? Where you've gone from a certain life where your home was almost always amazing and people complimented you. And they said, just like what you said, oh, this is so you, Michelle. Like,
yeah.
And now I'm more embarrassed. I'm like, oh, this is not, maybe the front door is like me because there's plants and stuff, but the rest really isn't. And and my corner that is like me, but Yeah, what can you say to someone like me who's
Yeah.
struggling?
Yeah, I think that we have different phases in our life. So, it's always funny when people say like my house is finished. Because I always think that house is never really finished. Like I feel like, it could be like finished for now in the sense that like we're always growing, we're always changing. So it's about then trying to figure out how to create spaces that accommodate the different changes in our lives. And so at one point we might have been able to have, a very clean, laid out space the way that we really wanted it. But now that we have other people in our lives, which we love and we want them there, how can we create a space that's reflective of that and still feels like me? So what I would do is I would try to figure out what it is that you are having a hard time with. And a lot of times, in addition to like understanding your past, your present sense of place, how you want it to look, because that would be your future sense of place, how you want it to look. I would definitely want to know that within the context of all the changes. Also, we think about our personality functioning and, and how that contributes to like what makes a great space for us. So, you know, personality is really complex, but like, there are some things that lend itself nicely to like, a design. So like, if you're extroverted or introverted, if you're extroverted, you may like really open spaces. If you're introverted, you might want more segmented spaces. How conscientious are you? Like, some people are very conscientious in the sense that they're very orderly. They don't like clutter. They don't like things all over the place. Some people are less conscientious in the sense that it's not like they like clutter, but it doesn't bother them as much. Or they need like really big organizing
Big
tools, like in your
clash.
face. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the big clash here. I'm like,
yeah.
why?
Yeah. The ones that don't mind clutter, it's not that they like the clutter, it's just that they're just not as conscientious. So they need like really in your face organizing tools, like when you come into the house, like instead of like having a closet where you put the shoes neatly, they might need like a big bin where you just dump your shoes and they need to be seen, because putting it in the closet is too much work. So I mean, it's about knowing the different personalities that are in the space, not just the clients, and being able to accommodate for that. And then there's like openness to experience, not so open. That's another sort of personality trait. Some people who are open to experience, maybe they try anything. Like they're like, hey, you want to put like, a big, zebra in the middle of the living room? I don't know. Like, I'm open to that. There's some people that are like, no, we're not going to do that. So it's about really being able to like understand the different the different personalities. And so you as the client who's like, my space is not like how it used to be, what would make it feel right? And how can we accommodate that with the changes? How can we like, as much as we possibly can? So maybe you have an area, for your child to like have her things all over the place, and so, but maybe there's easy cleanup. Maybe like you put them in bins at the end of the night so that after when she goes to bed, it's nice. So
I'm a big fan of that. So like she has like there's a where she eats, there's like a mat down now, thank goodness. So all the food falls there, and that way, even though we don't leave it there, but it's just like at least it's there and we can run around and pick it up later, but at least it's not like all over the wood floor, for example. And like I said, the bins are really great. Now she likes to take the bins and just dump it all out. She's finding one thing, she dumps the whole, but I'm like, okay, at least it's in your room. So I like the whole compartmentalizing. And so a box within a box within a box kind of deal where like the bin is in her room. But so we're slowly figuring out, but I love that point of where, like what you said, there's different personality types, and where I think I run on the continuum depending on my mood. Whereas my partner is more, he needs the big neon sign. This is where this goes. I've labeled stuff to try that out. So it's like you're learning in my case, learning to be a mom and learning to live with other, it's a lot of learning. And so this is why they say sometimes you need an expert like yourself, right? We need an expert to help us to see things a little differently, back to clarity, right? Like to have more clarity.
Right.
Like our bias, like I know my bias and my lived experience blinds me from seeing the whole picture.
True. And it's about growth. Like every stage in life, we always think about growth as, oh, that's such a great thing, but growth is hard. And sometimes you have to, fiddle with it first to figure out how you want it to be at that stage. So before, when you were living by yourself, that was a stage, and you kind of got that figured out design wise. So now you're in a different stage. So let's try to figure that out design wise. So that's kind of, and it's a sign of growth. So it's actually positive.
It makes me like feel a sense of relief to hear that.
Yeah.
Like, because it means that there's possibilities. Right? When you hear growth and you hear that there's stages, it means at least, because it's not like the past was all good, right? Like when I was living by myself, I was in school, I was doing, living, I was in cities all by myself. There were some cons to it, but to know that, okay, yeah, there's always something else potentially to look forward to. That makes me feel a sense of relief to know, okay, we could actually move through this stage successfully.
Right.
Until the next stage, right? Right. So that is really comforting.
And there's some people that, they hate where they're at. They don't like their space. They don't like, so it's about trying to figure out, say, what elements can we put in that can make you feel a little bit better. I'm not saying it's going to take your problems away, but just a little bit better. I mean, I've worked with some homeless youth. They're in a shelter. They're not stable. But how can we create a space for you for now that you can work with, and it can make you feel a little bit better? Can you put some plants in there? Can you put an artwork up that you did or that's meaningful to you? So, yeah. So
I love that. You've done a lot of meaningful work, which is also why I appreciate you. And I mean, I was even saying to someone, like, I don't know how many Black design psychologists are out there in the world. And we definitely need more. We need your influence. But in all of that, just really excited to hear all the work that you are putting out there. And for us, it's not just work, it's work and sacrifice, because being a Black therapist, I think naturally comes with a level of sacrifice that our white peers don't always have to experience. Kind of skip a few blocks, So I know that you you had some tips that you would love to share. You've already dropped several gems in this conversation and given people ideas of the way that they can move through their space differently and how to think differently. So you've already done that. But I know that you were going to share a few tips, so maybe we can get to that part.
Yeah, so I guess tips are meaningful because they kind of give you a place to start. Like, where do I start? So I want to design my space. How do I ensure that I'm not going to be like, oh, I thought this looked good in theory, but now it doesn't really look that good? How do I kind of minimize the chances of that? So I would say the one of the things that you can do is you can start off by exposing yourself to things that you like. Like, start paying attention to design and spaces. That's where we all have to start. There's an overload of images that can be overwhelming, but it could also be positive in the sense that you have a lot to look at. So figure out, and don't just look to be looking, figure out what it is you're drawn to. Try to find out the patterns in what you're drawn to. So I like these kind of spaces, or I like, those kind, modern minimalist spaces, or I like, maximalist, bohemian spaces. Like, figure out what it is that you like. And then don't just stop there, but try to put words to it. Because a lot of times we kind of have a sense of what we like, but we can't articulate it. So do your best to try to put words to it, because that is what brings clarity. So when I do the design psychology programming, I have people write ideal vision statements. So kind of write one for yourself. in when you have this pattern, you see that there's a pattern here. Can you put that into words, like what it is you like? And then once you do that, try to create mood boards around that statement, around what it is you like, collect it. And that will help you develop clarity and help you be sharper on what it is that you like and why. And then just keep repeating that for every room. So it's about really just kind of understanding what you like and being able to put it into words. I think that's what's really important.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. So the first step, just to sort of recap that, is to observe, to take note, to be mindful. Sort of like keeping like a little post-it up here that when you walk into a space, or maybe you're on Instagram and scrolling, or you're watching a TV show and, you know, someone's house. So just sort of notice like, oh, you know, what is that? What is that thing over there? And then starting to write it out. I love that part. I didn't even think about that, like putting words to it. Because I'm thinking about myself in a moment, like, okay, because I could see myself scrambling to describe. So I love like the tip of around sitting, taking a step back and writing your thoughts out. Yeah.
Because, you know, oftentimes when we talk about, you know, people who have experienced trauma, and sometimes that gets reflected in their spaces, we feel much more than we think. Sometimes when we're faced with something that's really like significant to us, or like even traumatic, we'll feel the way a space feels before we can identify what it is that we're feeling. So when we start to put words, and you kind of like, you're slowing down that process. So like you might go into a space and like feel really icky and you don't really know why, but it really is because of something bad that happened before, and it's reminding you of that. But if you slow it down and put words to it, then you have the clarity.
Love it. Yes, that kind of stop, think, and assess. Yes, love it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, definitely some tips that I'm going to take as well as I try to sort through my mix of emotions. When I look around the space, I'm just like, and love that insight around the different personalities, and not judging it, but more so embracing that there's a difference, and then seeing the beauty in those differences, right? Like seeing that like that it solves problems in a way, like kind of having these different personalities. We don't have to have 10 boxes when we could maybe just have one. Right. Whereas like in my space, I might have had 10 boxes, but I could do that when I was living by myself. But in this space, maybe it's just going to be one box at the front, and that actually works as well. So I love all of this. So just starting to wrap up, I'm wondering if there's anything else that you would like to touch on or share with the audience.
I'm trying to think. I just think it's really important to be able to know like how a space affects you, like your space, like and what you need to be able to sort of have a space that's calming and soothing and comforting. Sometimes people have really triggering like reactions to spaces. And if that is the case, it's just your body trying to tell you something. Sometimes it's just your body trying to tell you something. It's reminding you of something. And so to just explore that further and figure out what is triggering it and what you can do about it. And it's good. It's survival. It's, our body has a way of sort of helping us to survive. So that's more for people who have, maybe had some trauma, and so there are certain spaces that are triggering. So it's like, sometimes if you might not be aware that that's going to happen, and it all of a sudden happens, and you're like, I don't even know why I'm reacting this way. It's just your body just adjusting. So, it's okay.
And that reminds me, and this is going to be for if we do a part two, trauma-informed design, which I remember when you mentioned that, I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. That is in itself, I think, it's its own separate topic to sort of like niching down a bit more of a conversation. But and there's so many people out there with trauma who are either kind of re-experiencing it and very aware of it, and there's some people who have like kind of allowed it to sort of glaze over and repress, or scab over and repress, and then there's people out there, of course, who have healed from it. And what I love about your expertise is that it's another option. Not everyone, especially people with trauma, are needing to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. Sometimes it's going to be about sitting there and putting a collage together, almost art therapy like. Kind of see that happening, so that's super exciting for the field, that there's another way to go about healing.
They call them healing spaces, being able to create healing spaces.
I want to live, and that's one of the one of the posts I made. I was like, I want to live in a healing space like that.
Sounds nice.
Yes. So it feels like that maybe that could be that next conversation around informed, trauma-informed design, and then healing spaces, and really diving more into that, because people really need to know, and Black and Brown people need to know that this exists, that there is another way, especially as we see more people that look like us diving into wellness work for themselves. The reason why we're here. And this is what the channel is all about. It's accessibility and information, and growth. Well, this has been wonderful. All the things that I had imagined. I loved all the tips and tricks that you've shared, the gems that you've dropped, and also just your energy. Speaking of energy, always been so beautiful and delightful. So I'm looking forward to more of this.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed this talk.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Let's see.